The Garden of Ink and Bones is a monthly podcast about witchcraft, powerful plants, and making magic. I'm Belle of Belladonna and Bones, and I'll be joined by occult artist Rue of Old Omen, and we're witches who like to get our hands dirty. To us, magic is practical, visceral, and bound in blood to the soil and bones of our spiritual allies. It's time to get your hands into the dirt, do the work, make magic, and feel the witchcraft in your bones. Welcome to the Garden of Ink and Bones. Hello everyone, I'm Belle and with me today is Rue. Hi Rue.
Hey guys, how are you going?
We're back. I've officially designated this as Season 2. So we're Season 2, Episode 2 of The Garden of Ink and Bones. We are really excited to get on with the new season. We've been planning and reaching out to guests, and there's just so many good things coming that I'm really excited.
Yep, I definitely think there's a bit of a resurgence and new life, especially with the new season. I'm really excited for people that we have lined up and people to discuss with, ideas with in the future.
Exactly. So, important question, what tea are you drinking?
Haha. So this is another one of those ones that I think I previously mentioned that when I went to your garden, I absolutely fell in love with it, and I had to find a plant of my own. So lemon verbena has been just obsessively filling my mind. And I've started doing, because currently where I'm living, as everyone in Australia would know at the moment, that we're being absolutely bombarded by wildfires. We're now in a state of emergency. So hot tea during this weather doesn't really seem all that great. So I've been doing a iced blend. So what I've got going is I'm taking a few sprigs of my lemon verbena plant, a sprig of mint, and then I mix it up depending. So today I'm just keeping with the 3 ingredients, which is lemon verbena, mint, and then elderflower. But sometimes I like to put a little bit of pomegranate in it too. And there's a really good cordial that if you don't have access to elderflower that you can get from some of the local grocery stores, which is called Bottle Green, and they do either a elderflower or a pomegranate blend. So we have lemon verbena. It's worn to attract, generally to prevent bad dreams, aided to herbal mixtures and charms to increase effectiveness, used in purification baths. We also have mint, which promotes energy, communication, and vitality. Great for this podcast. And then we have either pomegranate for divination, wishes, fertility, wealth, or elderflower for sleep, releasing enchantments, protection against negativity, wisdom, house blessing, and business blessing.
Excellent. Sounds great.
Yeah. So I put them in a small amount of steeping hot water to allow everything and all those oils to come out, just enough to cover the herbs, and then ice water. It's absolutely amazing.
Sounds delicious.
What have you got going on?
I've got mint as well. So I've got common mint and peppermint, and I have linden leaf, which is it's to clear the mind. It's to quiet the mind at the end of the day, but more it was just to reset myself for the podcast, and also a couple of sprigs of Roman wormwood.
Nice.
Which I chucked in there just to get into the spirit. Plus my Roman wormwood is bonkers at the moment. The wormwood garden is a triangle about, a metre and a half on each side, and it's currently spilling out by the same amount again everywhere. So there's a distillation coming. I was thinking of running a distillation weekend soon to try to do that and see if anyone wants to come around. So if you're listening and you want to come around, let me know. We might organise a distillation course.
Awesome.
So, yeah, that's my tea. Now, let's just go back to the fires for a second. I know yourself, other witches, myself have all been doing workings to try to ameliorate the effects of that, but it is pretty severe up there, and our politicians and public figures are saying some of the stupidest things in
don't worry, they're sending their prayers and thoughts.
Yep, their prayers and thoughts are really useful. But not Israel Folau, the rugby league player who's not sending his prayers and thoughts. He's saying that it's everyone's fault for voting yes to gay marriage.
Oh God.
Because he's just brilliant like that. So, and Barnaby Joyce says that that the people who died probably voted Greens. Apparently they voted for the sex party, so I guess, fornication, climate, pick one. But just ridiculous, like really absurd things that are coming out, a lot of political grandstanding, when what we really need to do is address it, and in my opinion, get back to the way of the Indigenous people of the land manage the land with a lot more burning at the right time of year,
Yeah, it's a pretty convoluted matter, and that's the thing of, I feel like the last few years, every spring, it's abnormally hot, and there's always this part of me that sort of goes, well, this isn't right, something's going on, but this year is completely different to every other year. The ferocity of it, how early they've come on, the amount of damage, it's now reached over 1 million hectares of land. The amount that funding that the government has put into it is about $200,000 alone, which when you break that down to every single firefighter of how much each group gets, it's only about $5,000.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
We're underfunded, undermanaged. We don't have the resources that we need. And then we have the firefighters jumping up and down saying that we've been trying to warn you about this. We need your help on it. And I'm pretty devastated at the response that we're currently getting.
Yeah, it is absolutely unconscionable. And we know that this is how our country renews itself. We know that fires are part of our part of the DNA of our country, but it's not. This ferocity is a lesson, not in the way that Israel Folau wants it to be, but it's a wake up call. It's a get your shit together, work out how to manage this land properly, or not manage it, but work with it. And understand, and also address all these things that we're doing to the planet that are causing this climate catastrophe. And I know that some of it's alarmist. A lot of the climate stuff is alarmist, and a lot of it's bad science and things like that on all the sides. But still, it's undeniable that something is happening that needs to change.
Yeah, and it's not just us though at the moment too. You look everywhere around the world. Look at Venice at the moment of how badly they're being flooded. Then you've got places like South Carolina and California in the US that is still on fire when it's now their winter. Like this, you can't just sit down and say that this is an issue unique to Australia, because currently we're all seeing the repercussions of what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's selfishness on our part, You hear farmers and things cry out and say, give us funding because we want to grow cotton or soybeans or whatever. And it's like, but you can't grow cotton there. There's not enough water. So you want extra water to do that. Like, if that's where we screw up. We try to grow rice and cotton and soy in places where we shouldn't be trying to grow them. But
then we've also got massive mining companies that are tapping into basins that we need. Our largest freshwater supplies are being compromised.
Yeah,
what does this mean for our future? Anyway, I don't want to get onto a big political bandwagon or make any statements, but currently the fires are atrocious, and any witches out there that want to try and do work to something, rain, anything, would be appreciated.
Rain, moving the thoughts of the people who need to say yes to giving more money to our CFA, country fire associations and regional fire associations. Move those thoughts, move the rain, cool the tempers, give people sensible brains.
Yeah, and that is something that I do want to put that disclaimer, because it goes back to an argument that you and I had fairly early on in our recordings, where I don't think this should be about marching around and cursing people and saying that this person will be hexed for what they do. I think if anything we need in this time is for them to be more open to things like empathy.
Yeah. Be less selfish, and less trying to score political points, and more thinking about what's actually happening to the people that they're supposed to be representing.
Yeah. So,
excellent.
Moving on.
I think that was important because we'd had to rally the troops.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So this week we are going to start with Besom, Stang and Sword by Christopher Orapello and Tara Love MacGuire. Now, you may know those names because they have a wonderful podcast called Down at the Crossroads. From knowing that, you will know that Christopher has a wonderful way with words, and that does shine through in a lot of the ritual language in this book. So it was an interesting book to read through. And actually, I just want to talk through it on reading. I actually couldn't find my physical copy until this morning. So I grabbed the Kindle copy and then discovered that there was an Audible add-on. So I've actually been listening to it, which was quite pleasant. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you think?
So one of the things that they do reference a lot of really, really great authors in it, which are some of the authors that we've even touched works on, or that you and I are at least familiar with, and I'm sure plenty of our listeners are too. Like, for example, they go into Robert Cochrane's works, Carlo Ginzburg, Jeffrey B. Russell, Emma Wilby, Claude Lecoq, excuse me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Eva Pokes, and then, Gemma Gary. So they've got some amazing authors, and they cite everything, but then the book itself is rather massively eclectic on different traditions, which essentially is what traditional witchcraft is. I thought it was really sort of great little introductory book for anyone that isn't sure where to start with traditional witchcraft. This is a nice little introduction.
And that's exactly it. I read it through, and essentially Chris and Tara seem to have taken this, and they started working together later in their relationship after, both being on quite different paths for a long time. And this is the amalgamation of what works for them. And I feel like it's an amalgamation of what can work for other people. I feel it's very American focused. That's where they are, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it's the book I would give a new beginner now. That's what I feel like it is for now. It touches on lots of things. It gives them some tools. It has enough introspective ritual to give them a grounding in what the inner world is like when doing magic, and some practical things as well. So the book starts out with some things on becoming a witch and talking about animism, and the book starts out by telling you that this is what we made of it, and this is what you can take these bits and make them your own as well.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
And I thought that was a pretty prominent point that I found when reading through it, of they do reiterate a few times that, this is just our formulation, our opinion, none of it is gospel. Do as you will with it, rather than worshipping it as this is a lineage, which I did appreciate, because I feel like some of the traditional witchcraft books out there, it almost has this underlying connotation where it's speaks about how, this is my path, this is my practice, these are the rules, and it's completely set and there's no room for movement. Whereas this seems a bit more honest about how eclectic the practices are, how much they've taken from different sources, from different authors, and say that you can change it to your own working.
Yeah, and I did appreciate that. And actually, a new witch reached out to me after our last episode, and I mentioned that we'd be reviewing a book I thought was a good book for a new witch, and it is. It's, if you're just starting to be interested, this is a book that you can go through and pick and choose. But essentially, most of it you could run through this book from beginning to end, with the different rituals. Especially at the beginning, there's a few different rituals and getting in touch with the land and things like that.
Yeah,
that are really useful.
Definitely. I feel like when I sort of look at how many years I've been on this path, reading through a lot of the information, I've found that information through original sources. And, it's years and years of work and years of going through books and different practices and different paths and different eons from history. Like, whereas this at least sort of takes out all that work.
Yeah, and
makes it that little bit easier for anyone that's just stepping onto traditional witchcraft. And sort of, I do like the fact too that, because it is something that sometimes I come across in other books of traditional witchcraft that sort of almost makes me get rubbed the wrong way just that tiny bit, where they mention, so they have mentions of Baphomet, the Sabbatic goat.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about the witch lord, and they talk about, and this is a statement from the book, as we make our way into these other realms, the witch lord is our guide, our contact, our touchstone. We do not worship him, however. He is not a deity. Instead, he is a primary spirit of place and primordial force, the devil for a new millennia of practice. And I think that's a fairly important part, to me at least, because there's so many practices that I've found, I've read, and I've loved, but then it gets to this part where it's like, then there's this deity and it almost feels like worship. And to me, traditional witchcraft isn't about worshipping anything else but finding power from yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, look, I kind of hate the term witch lord and witch whatever. What's the lady one?
The goddess.
Witch goddess. I didn't like that. I don't know. It's something about it that just makes me feel a bit vomity in my mouth. But yeah, the intent is right. And it doesn't have. The other thing I really like about it is, while it talks about all of these things, and it never gets to a point where, especially with Chumbly and some of the others, where they sort of go, but you'll need an initiated witch to take you through this.
Yeah.
That's what I did appreciate, because, let's face it, most of us didn't get here that way. It's not, I was fortunate enough to come across a coven to work with, but I'm not an initiate. It's a stupid part of our heritage that there's this misnomer, misunderstanding, something, I don't know, that you have to be initiated, and I think that's... So, did you find any tech you liked?
I did like they touched especially on seership and divination, and they had a few little practices that I thought, if anything, were quite helpful for anyone that's wanting to build that strength. Because, a lot of psychic exploration or divination, in a sense, or magic in general, it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the better you get at it. Whereas seership is one of those things that I feel like they don't often talk about how to grow that ability. You find it in trance, and you find directions for trance and how to do trance work and breath work and different breath exercises. But with seership, it's often something like stare at a black obsidian mirror, stare at a crystal ball.
And see shit.
Yeah, and see shit, instead of they actually go through the thing of saying, soften your gaze and focusing on what you can see at the very edge of your gaze without moving your eyes, that sort of thing, helpful little tidbits that I haven't found anywhere else that I did really appreciate.
Yeah. Oh, I liked the little charm bag divination that they basically said, get some little tiles and put these symbols on them. And they kind of reminded me of there's witches' runes that I first came across from a coven called Apple Grove in Sydney, but I know they're from somewhere else before that. But they had basically, again, you have all these little symbols on these runes that are more modern and easily recognizable than, traditional runes, and go from there. And I thought that was quite nice, especially when we think back to our bones and throwing the bones and things like that. So I thought that was a really useful one.
Yeah.
For that sort of thing.
Yeah, I know I have come across, when I did read that one, I know that there was a memory, and I can't specifically state where, and I wish I knew now. There is a few tile divination systems I've come across over the years, and I feel like one of them comes from almost a Greek divination from memory.
Okay.
But I do know I've also seen sets for sale over the years that, for the life of me, I can't find now, where you can buy different tile divination sets. But I think it's awesome because then, you can make your own. You can completely bend it to how you want.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, And the book does say, take all these things and make them your own. Do you know, actually, one of the things I think is really good about this book that I think a lot of other books don't touch on, more modern books are touching on more and more, which is the animism and getting to know the genius loci of place, and where you live and connecting with the land. I think that is a really good part of this book.
Totally. And that's, I guess, that's what my practice has really been built on, because, I've never sought out a coven like yourself, and like you were saying, a lot of us aren't initiated, but a lot of my information and my workings and what I get has been from me building a connection with the land that I grew up.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the one chapter that we had a few issues with was the herbalism chapter. Now, Tara is a wonderful gardener, and all of the information in the herbalism chapter is correct. And it's, it's factual, and it's, it's informative. It feels a bit thin. There's 1, 2, 3, 6 herbs mentioned. Half of them are baneful, and they say not to work with, kind of way. Well, they don't say not to work with. They just say they spend 3/4 of their time saying how dangerous they are.
Yeah. Which, this is the discussion that we had. And personally, I do understand where they're coming from, especially when you've got a book that's an introductory book to people that are new to the path. You do want to have that disclaimer out there of, please don't eat the datura. It will kill you. It will drive you mad. But then there's also the other side of it too, of not stating to consume these things, but still building a healthy relationship and sitting and meditating with these plants and going from a place of respect. You will get a relationship from these. You will get knowledge and information from these plants. So, for example, we have the Brugmansia plant, which is very closely linked and related to the Datura plant, to the point that often people confuse the two. I do believe that they both have the same folk name of the Devil's Trumpet. The Brugmansia is more of a tree, whereas the Datura is more of a shrub, and then you've got different types of Datura. However, with the Brugmansia plant, a lot of the South American shamans, before ayahuasca ceremonies, the way that they found that they would use the plant, because they stated that it was so energetically potent that it could make you blind, it could poison you, it could kill you. So they found that they would place the flowers of the brugmansia in the river and sit and bask in the river before their ayahuasca ceremony, and that way they'd take on the vibrational energy of the flower to help cleanse them rather than consuming it because it was so toxic.
That's great. That's really great. And I think that's it. And I want to be clear. We're not saying there's anything wrong with this herbalism section. We're just saying that from our point of view, there was probably just a bit too much given to why you shouldn't, and not rather than just talking about herbs you should work with.
Yeah.
Like it felt like a cautionary tale rather than a rather than here are the plants we do work with and what we can work with. And I know, from discussions with Tara on Instagram that her garden has a lot of these plants. We all grow them because we're fascinated by them because their energies are amazing. But, when we look at the sections on Datura, Belladonna, Mandrake, actually the one very useful thing I think they say is that most Mandrake root you buy is thorn apple, which is Datura, not actually Mandrake. So that's, I think, for me, it's like that chapter is maybe just a cautionary tale for Instagram, which is wrong. I shouldn't say Instagram riches. I'm demeaning a lot of people who are just finding their path. But yeah, and to be honest, I like my Instagram as well, but I wanted something else. I wanted something else from that chapter.
So what else would you take away from this book?
It's quite hoodoo heavy in the practical. I would have liked to see more non-hoodoo, but that's not what they do as far as I can tell. I think it's I want any newbies out there to grab it, read it, listen to it, whatever, because it's so much better than picking up solitary witchcraft now,
Yeah.
If you're not ready for Gemigari and the Devil's Dozen, if you're not ready to work through that, then start here. That's it. It's start here. That's what I want people to do.
Yeah, it also reminded me of a book that I found fairly early on, and it's still a really helpful little basic introductory book, which is Treading the Mill. And I felt like it sort of had those sort of similarities of it's a nice basic, this is where you start. Here's some good basics of how to approach different systems, how to approach different plants, how to do things in a way that you will get something out of, but entirely flexible of you can make this your own.
Yeah. And I think, if you aren't going to go digest the Blue Book and, the Buckthorn's Big Blue Book of Magic, or Paul Hewson's Mastering Witchcraft, if you aren't going to go digest all those, read this.
Yeah, or read even this, just people that aren't sure about traditional witchcraft and whether it's for them.
Yeah, and I do think that it gives you an idea of the different elements that a traditional witch works with. And saying that traditional witchcraft's not about worship and things doesn't necessarily mean that traditional witches don't do worship or don't work with entities. That's not what it is. But yeah, this is a good start. That's what I want people to think.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, for me, it's, well, personally speaking, entirely on my own behalf of that I do work with entities and I do work with deities, but I feel like it's more of a relationship rather than expecting them to do the work for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, it's I don't know. I'm very positive about this book. I'm positive about this book for anyone just starting out. I feel like let's hold this book up as an example of what new witches should be starting with.
Definitely.
And then, there might have to be an addition to some herbals. And I do think that Tara will probably write a better herbal later on in her career. I think that's there's a potential there.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about a herbal to go with it, Harold Roth, 13 Witching Herbs. Is it 13 Witching Herbs? Is that what it is?
I believe so.
It's in here. My library. The Witching Herbs, 13 essential plants and herbs for your magical garden. Pair those two together, and I think you will get a good start.
Awesome. Just a note for editing purposes later that when I was mentioning the tiles earlier, that one of the divination systems is the Mahjong.
Of course, Mahjong is not just a game; it's a tile divination and warp strategic planning thing. All right, so the other thing we were going to talk about this week. Oh, I'm just going to mention for everyone. We have been working the Circle Thrice Lunation, right? We are going to save that for another upcoming episode because we just might have an exciting guest to talk about it with. So we'll save that and we'll come back to that. But we are still working the Lunation right. I'm having some good results and some good feelings. What about you, Rue?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for it, and I'd really like to be able to sit down and go into it further. But for now, I think, we'll leave that one.
We'll come back to that. All right. The other thing we wanted to talk about was the wonderful smoky world of incense.
Yes, found in pretty much every single religious property and practice through history, pretty much.
Yeah, everyone burns stuff. We burn it because it's sweet smelling. We burn it because it's awful smelling. We burn it in worship. We burn it to get high. We,
burn it to exorcise demons, all sorts of things.
Yeah, make magic.
Yeah. So I know over the years you've given me a few amazing little blends that you've made yourself. We had one in particular, and I'm hoping you can refresh me on the name of it, which was in a little woven basket you made a few years ago.
Oh, yeah, that was, I can't remember the name, but it was part of one of the first Magica Herbae boxes, and it was a eucalypt and rosemary. Has quite a few. It was just a delicious little thing, but it also took the scent of the smoked basket on as it matured. So, but that was for the rosemary Magica Herbae box.
It was absolutely beautiful. I've still got the little basket, and I've got a tiny bit left in it because I just haven't been able to bring myself to use up that last bit.
Yeah, I should look at reblending that. That was a lovely incense to burn. It's funny because there's incenses that are really nice and incenses that are not so nice but really powerful.
Yeah.
One of the others I made was called Silvis, and it was part of the Amanita series, and it was the pine and dirt from where the Amanitas grew, as well as some Amanita. And it wasn't terribly pleasant smelling, but it was powerful as hell,
Yeah.
Just working with that whole process of the plant.
Yeah. And that's it. I mean, our podcast is about herbalism, and every single herb that you grow, you can use in some form of incense. There are certain ones that you do want to be aware of that, if you do burn them, the smoke can be quite toxic. So be aware of what you're burning. Don't just chuck anything on.
Watch that hemlock and monkshood.
Yeah. That's it. But one in particular that I'm pretty interested in talking about, because it almost has a little bit of overlap with what we're currently working with the lunation rite, is kyphi or kyphet, which is originally an ancient Egyptian incense that was found written on a few different temple walls. And then the Greeks, of course, came in and have had to have Latinized the name, which is where we get kyphi from, and tried to scribe a lot of those really ancient recipes and sort of put it out there to the world, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, there's so many recipes for kyphi out there. And yeah, so how do you do it?
So I will note that how I originally stumbled onto this was there is an amazing channel, which I'm not sure if it's still actually active. I found years and years and years ago on YouTube by a woman named Annie called Mirth and Revenance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
She was the lady who taught me to put a tea towel over my mortar and pestle.
Ah, there you go. Yeah, I found her years ago, and I'd actually forgotten completely about the fact that I'd originally gotten my recipe from her years ago until I was thinking about doing this podcast, because it's still one of those ones that I really do love to do. And so for anyone out there, YouTube, Mirth and Revenance, kyphi recipe, she goes into it in amazing detail, and the way she says it and articulates it is so incredibly beautiful. But so if any of you have Instagram witches, I've recently put up a photo on my Instagram of a kyphi blend that I have made. And so
it looks delicious.
Like the lunation rite, it is a meditative practice. It is a long practice as well, where you're doing this generally daily rather than, just whipping some up from the garden in one night, which is, I think, something that I'm going to redo another blend again, because you can do it in a shorter span of 5 days. Traditionally, you find more that a lot of the recipes call for specific numbers of ingredients of, say, 16 ingredients and will be worked for over 16 days. Or some people state that, then it starts to get a bit muddy of some people like, no, it's 10 days. No, it's 13 days. And even some of the ingredients that when the Greeks found it on a lot of these temple walls, they weren't even sure what some of the ingredients were. So the one that I did recently myself, and I'll go through the whole practice, but first for the ingredients is I've used sandrak, which is the equivalent of cypress. You've got myrrh, juniper berries, frankincense, gum arabic, raisins, pine kernels, eucalyptus resin, honey, cinnamon, acacia, which I know that gum arabic is actually an acacia, but I've used a local acacia to have that connection to the land.
Mm-hmm.
Mint and lotus. So the way that this is traditionally made, and I would love for everyone to sort of go out, make their own blends and sort of see what you come up with. But let me grab my notes.
Yeah, I've only made it once, and it was quite a long process, and I really enjoyed the process.
Yeah, it's a pretty beautiful process. And so you start with two different parts, essentially. You have your wet part, which you make first, which generally has about 50 raisins, a cup of finely chopped figs or dates, red wine, which is just enough to cover, and then, say, your lotus oil, or you can substitute it for ylang ylang if you want. So you put these ingredients together, cover it with enough red wine just to cover it, and then slowly sort of stir it. And so you're going to allow this wet ingredient to steep in an airtight jar while you're making the rest of it through the 16 days. And every time you notice that the wine sort of goes down or lessens, and you're going to just top it up with a little bit just to, again, keep it covered. You don't want it too heavy. The other ingredient is honey, which is generally seen as the main staple. So a lot of your pellet incenses, their only wet ingredient in historical context is generally honey. So wine is sort of optional here. But for this recipe, we're going to use wine. So you've got all your wet ingredients mixed together in an airtight jar, separate. Anytime you notice that it dries out, add a little bit more wine. So then with your dry ingredients, that's where I think this whole process becomes really quite beautiful and phenomenal. So each day you're going to work on a different dry ingredient, and you're going to put it into your mortar and pestle. You're going to sit, you're going to meditate with it. You're going to try and feel the energies of that ingredient. And then you can completely change it to however you want, in the fact of, if you want, you can chant over it. As you're grinding it with the mortar and pestle, you can think about what properties this herb or this spice has. Put the intention into the grinding meditative process until it's really, really fine. And then at the end of that day, you're going to set it in a separate jar to your wet stuff. You're not going to combine them yet. So it's pretty amazing. Every single day you're sitting down with a new and different ingredient. You're doing a new, different little ritual. Make it up as you go, change it as you go, connect with the plants, look at even historically how it was used, whether there's any, you can look at deities that are connected to it. So you're going to work through that. Generally, it lasts about, you've got 12 days. Then at the end of it is where you're going to blend them. So all your dry ingredients are in one jar, all your wet ingredients are in another jar, and then you've got honey separate. You're going to put a tiny amount of wine on around day 12 into your ingredients. If you're working with, I think it's like a 16 ingredient recipe, just enough to slightly wet all your dry ingredients. You're going to stir them. You're going to think about the fact that you're combining these ingredients. You're going to think about how they come together as a whole rather than separate things, the importance of them joining together. You're going to allow that to sit overnight, let it dry out a little bit. Then on the next day, you're going to very, very gently simmer your wet ingredients. You're only going to bring it to a really soft bubbling. You're not going to dry it out. You still want it wet, and then you're going to take it off. So then you're going to join your wet ingredients to your dry ingredients. And that's also where your honey comes in. Some people insist originally that you're meant to boil your honey as well. For mine, I don't do that. At least for my next batch, I'm not going to. I have done it in the past. And so because honey was originally the only wetting agent in pellet incense, you can use as much as you like and not be too worried about going too far with it. So slowly add your dry mixture to your wet. You're slowly looking for a consistency of Play-Doh, pretty much, that sort of sticky holding together. So if it is too dry, add a little bit more honey, join it all together, and then you're going to let it cure for a few more days as well. But it's a pretty amazing process. I really urge people to try it. It's just phenomenal. And you can change all the ingredients as well. Traditionally, on the older recipes that we've found on ancient Egyptian temples, is they were all local ingredients. And then as we found Egypt became more powerful, was open to new trade routes, it became more exotic. And so you can make it as exotic or local based as you want.
Yeah, and I think there's a power in creating your own local version of it.
Yeah.
Of course, you have your beautiful honey that is in your actual garden. But there is a power in creating your own local version of it. So what was kyphi used for?
So it had a few different properties. So you had a very basic one that they found they used purely for fumigation purposes, because the word cap from capet actually means to perfume or to sense, or to heat or to ignite. But then you've also found that they believed it had a lot of healing properties as well. There was a looking for the name, probably won't be able to find his name. There was a few different Greeks that did come across the original recipes found on the temple walls of ones to do with Isis and Raj, which did believe they had healing properties, which, I mean, you look at smoke in general and it can cure meat. It's antibacterial in that sense. You've got all sorts, that's generally fumigation has been shown to have those healing effects. But then as well, a lot of it is to do with the priests in the Egyptian temples were making this amazing meditative incense to sort of bring them closer to the gods. There's, one of the ingredients in it is your lotus, which is your Nymphea caerulea, which they worked with a lot. You'll see the blue lotus on a lot of their hieroglyphs. So they would even say steep it in wine and they drink it because they believed that it brought them closer to the gods. it had the psychoactive property in it, which was a porphin. It's an alkaloid. So there is that sort of idea there that that's why it had these amazing potencies. But then even, you've got ingredients like myrrh and frankincense, which is riddled through history. It's connected to Jesus. It's connected to so many different religions.
Yep, every religion in history has used it. And now we've got drug companies doing studies on using frankincense as an antidepressant, which, we as herbalists have known for years. And frankly, I think everyone has known because we use it in every incense, so it makes you feel good.
Yeah, you just think about the atmosphere it creates. You walk into a room that's burning incense and you instantly relax.
Yeah, especially just a beautiful frankincense. And there really is varying qualities of frankincense for this sort of thing. There's a couple of different sellers who sell reputable, good frankincense. It's become really trendy at the moment, so please do try to make sure you're working with a seller who has a reputable source rather than just stripping the boswellia trees, which is happening a lot.
And that is something I wanted to touch on as well. So there is a website that's pretty great, which is incensemaking.com. They have a conservation section, and a lot of these traditional resins that you're working with are massively endangered. And I think it sort of goes back to what we were speaking about at the beginning of the podcast about current circumstances, is that if you don't need something that's coming from an endangered species, coming from a country that really shouldn't be exporting it, do you really want that sort of energy in your incense?
Yeah, exactly. You don't need that. And it's the same as watching. I mean, this is why I grow as much as I can. Yeah. And I really do. My process has evolved so far now that, I mean, there's only one balm I make that has things that I don't grow in it. And aside from the oil base. But it doesn't work. Like, it will stop the magic working if one of the ingredients is not right with the world.
Yeah. I think dragon's blood is a pretty good example of that. So a lot of dragon's blood incense you get isn't actually even dragon's blood. The dragon's blood tree is so incredibly endangered that we've generally stopped using its resin. So if you have genuine dragon's blood resin, it's like ivory. I think you really want to look at sort of the ethics behind that.
Yeah, exactly. And realistically, Dracaenas as a species is very broad. And particularly in Melbourne, we grow a lot of the varieties, but not the original variety. The leaves of the rubber varietals are just as good. Like, they make a good incense. You can grow your own Dracaena and use the leaves. You don't have to be going and buying dragon's blood, whether it's real or fake. And yeah, it doesn't have to be like that. So
yeah,
just think about what you're buying.
That's it. And like you said before, I do think that generally you're going to get more potency out of a plant that you have sit and tended to every single day. Even if it's something, like you said earlier, as simple as rosemary. It's widely available. Everyone can grow it. It grows well in our climate. But think about the relationship that you have with this plant of every single day. You're tending to it, you're watering it, you're making sure that it's disease and pest free. You're having this relationship with it. Surely you're going to have more connection to that than you are from some of these exotic ingredients that you're never going to see where they've come from.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone should think about that when they're making any type of magic. But so back to kyphi for a sec. There was something else I was going to ask you. Oh, I wanted to talk about timing, astrological timing. I know in general, it's not something that we have a timing for. But did you have any thoughts on, whether there's moon phases you should make it under, or anything else like that?
So yeah, in the past, I've sometimes worked with it where I've tried to have it finish so that I'm going to have it finish on, say, a certain Sabbath, so that, or
Yep.
say a different lunar cycle, or say working towards the full moon. So at the full moon, then you can sit and charge the final product. So I do think about it in that sort of sense. Not a whole lot, but
Yeah.
generally I try and have some vague timing rather than just sort of jumping in and making it whenever I like.
Yeah, and I think timing is, something close to my heart. And I think something that a lot of magic is, when you have the luxury of working with timing, do it. If you are having if you have an emergency or a time critical situation, then do the magic anyway, is my
Yeah.
opinion.
But you can always look
Because
at timings through the day for that too. Of say you have something that's
exactly.
critical. Like the other night, I contacted you, and it wasn't the
Yeah,
best timing of the week, but it was like, this is a critical situation. So
yeah,
how about the timing of lunar timing of Cancer?
yeah, yep. And that was good. And it's, yeah, look at your planetary hours, download the planetary hours app. Um, PH Pro, I think it is, on Android. There's a few different things you can look at. Planetus is another app. Planetus is an excellent app if you want to look at just very basic movements of the planets, and their effects.
Yeah.
You can go into solar fire and all of the and DNist, if you want really heavy astrological stuff, but you can start with the basics, and see what you can do.
Yeah.
So,
And I know traditionally as well, the Egyptians had timings for burning kyphi as well, if you wanted to sort of include that. So for daybreak, they had frankincense. For noon, they burnt myrrh, but dusk was always kept specifically for kyphet.
oh, that's really nice. So dusk, that's good. It's a good way to work with it. So, other than Kefet, um, there's a few books that I would say do incense well. Um, of course, Viridarium Umbris, by Daniel Schulk, which you can find in PDF form, um, has, I believe, an excellent section. It's in that flowery language that Schulk likes to use, but it is a really good section on incense. There's books by a guy called Carl Neal. Let me just reach over and grab them. But he's written a lot of books on incense, or two or three books on incense making. He is an incense maker. That's his thing. He has written, the books become more magic, like incense magic, as he goes on and writes them. So they're good books. They're
Yeah.
good, a good start to understanding the materials, the processes. He does use a lot of exotics, but there's a good. It's a good way to get an understanding of how to formulate an incense.
Yeah.
Um,
And then, of course, I'm always a bit funny about mentioning him, but one of the first books that I found that sort of really sparked my passion was a Scott Cunningham book, which is Incense, Oils, and Brews.
you can't not have it in your library, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, it does need an update, and you know, a certain witch who may have a lot of time on her hands right now may have been thinking about that quite heavily the last week. Yeah, it needs an update, and I was really just sitting down thinking, oh, you know what, this is actually where I sit in the world of magic. Is I don't want to write another herbal glossary. My way of working with the herbs is working with the herb, and maybe that's the niche for me. Is maybe updating incense, oils, and brews, because I think that's what's missing in the pantheon of books right now.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
we'll and I, since I have ready access to a wonderful illustrator, Ah, dear. I've just got to do things, huh? We've just got to
Yeah.
maybe have the
Sit
next thing
down
is a
and
motivation spell.
yeah, or just putting the time aside once a week.
That's right. Or every day, since I don't have anything to do right now. So there's lots of incenses. There's lots of ways to work with it. What do you, when you make an incense that's not just for general working, what have you made incense for? What have you made specific incenses for?
That's a bit of a big question. It needs some thought.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
continue. Yep.
I've often made incenses to connect with a plant. As I said, when I was made Silvis, it was a way to connect a ritual back to a plant and its place. That's a good way to use an incense. The other ways I've done it is when I've wanted a drawing spell, like I wanted to draw something to me. I've made money incenses, I've made love incenses, I've made incenses just so I have the ash at the
Yeah.
end of it.
And that's one of the
Yeah.
big things is like, I don't think I ever do any kind of ritual or spell work without having some kind of incense there in some way. Like frankincense is one of those main ones that I use, and I generally use it going by the thought that it's one of those energies that helps bring your prayer or your intention up, that allows things to sort of connect to that. But, then I've got ones for dreaming. Dreaming is one that I really love doing incenses for, of certain dream herbs. You've got, your Mexican dream herb, your Damiana, you've got your sun openness, of creating different blends to burn before you fall asleep, looking for prophetic dreams. Bay as well. Bay is another great one for burning, for, as we've mentioned in the past, of the divination process for watching how the leaf burns, but then the fumigation as well. But then with my current kyphi blend, that's something that I was even thinking about this morning, of I'm wanting to do another version of what I've just done, but I want to do it with the intention of working towards what we were discussing before, of the current plight of the situation that we're in. So I want to be able to look at different plants for spell work, for trying to help the current situation, putting that meditation of choosing each herb that works towards a common goal of helping us be more aware of cooling tempests, like you said, of bringing empathy, of bringing intelligence out, instead of people sort of working on this animalistic mindset. So I want to every day do a meditation of working towards this, and then I'll have this final product in the end that I can burn with doing ritual work for trying to help the current situation.
And then you could take the ash and mix it into an ink and write a letter
I could,
to those
yep.
people that you want to influence.
That's very true. And same as sigils as well, of you mentioned before, of using ash. And ash is one that I've used before for making inks, for writing sigils, and then you burn the sigil, and then you put that sigil in the water, and then you pour that water somewhere. It can go on and on and on. There's so many different ways.
Yeah, and it's just working it through. Like as you do a banishing incense, you do your banishing papers with someone, and with someone's name and the intent and the ritual around it, and then you burn those with the incense, and you take all that ash and you sprinkle it where they sit, or where they go, and there's that element of continuous working that happens, which I think is really important in magic.
Yeah, and that's speaking of sprinkling ash, and that's something that is actually a partner's friend made it on the news recently. So their house burnt down, and they went and they took the ash of their house and dumped it on Parliament House on their lawn. And, I think that in itself has amazing energy behind it. It really makes a statement.
Yep.
Think about
really
that in
does.
your magical work as well. And that's something that I'm always conscious of, but maybe some people sort of aren't, of when you're finished with a spell, what are you doing with everything that you're left over with? Where are you putting that? Are you keeping it sitting around in your house? Do you really want it sitting there? Do you ritualize getting rid of it? What's your general process for that?
Yeah, hell yes. I've got one. I've got to get out of the house in the next couple of days. It's got to go. It literally has to go to the tip. There is nowhere else for it to go. It has to go to the tip. It
Yeah.
has to. It has to finish its life in this awful place that we've created. And I don't. Often, if I'm cursing or making bottles or things, I'll try to work with a natural material that I can, biodegrade, blah, blah, blah. Because, there was one I think I talked about where she threw a film canister into the sea and it bugged me like hell.
Yeah.
This is in a biohazard disposal container, and it will be disposed of accordingly.
Yeah.
Which is, let me just touch on that. Biohazard containers, sharps containers, urine containers, things like that, they're really useful for curses because they get disposed of in a really specific way. And yeah, it's you literally can walk into a hospital and put things in a sharps container or a hospital waste disposal, and it will be incinerated.
Yep.
It's
same as most pharmacies too. Most pharmacies
Yep.
will take your sharps containers.
Yep. Really, really useful, I found, for disposing of things like that. Other times I've taken curse bits, wrapped them in clay and buried them, because the clay will eventually dissolve back to clay in the earth, and I haven't fired them in the kiln or anything. I've just wrapped them in the clay. Those sort of things are useful as well.
Yeah. And then
you can lead shield.
Sorry, go on.
You can use lead. If you go to Bunnings, they have lead sheets. They're quite expensive. They're really useful if you want to do cursing, because you can you can write on them, you can roll them up, and you can bury them. Or if there's something you need to get rid of, you can wrap the lead around it as a shielding, because we know lead is a shielding. It's it saves us from radiations, blah blah blah. All of those things are very useful.
Yeah. And that's another one that I've sort of used too for containing things, is in the past made, say, a coffin out of mirrors, but the mirrors are facing in. That way nothing can sort of escape. But yeah, always thinking about as well, like, are you burying something, to ground it? Are you burning something to release it? Are you putting it into running water to negate that? You want to also be aware of, say you're cursing someone, you don't want to then go and burn it, because then you're just releasing it back out there.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Sometimes that might be the way you're doing it, but if you're going to burn it, you're burning it with an intent to send.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think if you're going to do it that way, and especially like dumping curse things in rivers and stuff like that, think about the river.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, think about the land where you're putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I recently did one where the end of it is I went out and buried it in the front of a graveyard under a stone, not over a grave, of course, but around a church, because you're looking at that energy that the church has and how it's going to deal with what you're giving to it.
Yeah, and that's it. There's just so many things you can do with incense, and I think you need to work with it. Even if it's just start with some frankincense or ethically sourced frankincense or something like that.
Even things
start
out of your
working
spice cabinet. Like recently I've been using cinnamon sticks for burning instead of a smudge stick.
Mm-hmm. Again, another good one. I was going to say charcoal. That's what I was going to talk about. So charcoal discs. Now you can go to your witch supply store and you can pay a fortune for them, or you can go to the Greek deli and buy them very, very cheaply. And they've got different sizes. Like there's a very small one, which I find really useful because it only burns for like 10, 15 minutes. And so if you've got something you need to do in the morning, you can light it up, do your thing, and not worry about it keeping going for an hour or so.
Yep.
But they do smell heavily of saltpeter. Like they smell like burning charcoal. So of course an alternative is Japanese bamboo charcoal, which is scentless. Is that the right word? Yeah. You can buy different packets from the internet, different pricing, different qualities. If I can find the lady I used to buy mine from, I will put a link in. She was in Australia. But much, much harder to get going. You'll need a more significant kind of lighter to get it going. But it burns much cleaner. And if you don't want the influence of the saltpeter, I think it's worth an investment for certain spell work.
Yep. And even as well, the hookah charcoals. So they're actually made to be more safely consumed than your incense ones. So you can't go out and use a standard charcoal tablet for incense on a hookah pipe, for example, because you will asphyxiate yourself. But then you can go into most tobacconists and get the hookah charcoal tablets, which are more able to be breathed in.
Oh, that's great. I hadn't even thought about those. That's a really good point. Because yes, you can't don't burn copious amounts of charcoal inside. It's a carbon dioxide risk.
I always take it outside because it is so intense.
Yeah, and that's why I like the little tiny ones. Like they're literally the size of a 5-cent piece and about 4 5-cent pieces deep or 5 5-cent pieces deep. They're quite small and they're very useful because they're not going to carbon dioxide out your room. Yeah, and never try to burn charcoal to heat a room. That's a way to die very quickly.
Yeah.
Just a note for everyone there.
And don't use your fingers. Please find some tongs.
Yes, tongs. Seriously, you'll be surprised at how quickly they get hot. Yep. We've all burned ourselves.
They are amazing, though, when you do light them up and they're crackling across. Like, there's something almost magic about that alone.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, there is absolutely a time and place for saltpeter based charcoals because they do have an amazing energy. But when you want to be very pure with what you're doing, I recommend getting some bamboo charcoal or the hookah shisha charcoals. So yeah, that's really good. Wow, that's been a long episode for us. Is there anything else we need to tell people?
I don't think so. Just be mindful of each other. Try and put a bit more empathy out there.
Absolutely. Thank you to Chris and Tara for writing the book that we got to discuss this week. Thank you to Mirth and Revenants for giving us the kickoff with some kyphi. Rue, thank you for joining us and being with me today.
And thank you for this amazing podcast that you've kicked us both up the butt for doing.
Woohoo! So excited. If you have any feedback, guys, please leave us a comment on the Facebook pages or our Instagrams. You can find me at Belladonna and Bones, and the podcast Instagram is at Garden of Ink and Bones. And Rue, they can find you at
old.omen on Instagram.
Easy. And of course all links, and we'll try to link some of the books and videos and things that we've talked about in the show notes.
And I will also be writing up a recipe for kyphi and a silver noodle, just saying, for people to be able to get their hands on to work through.
That's exciting. So good. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We will talk to you again in a month's time. Have a great week.
Awesome. Bye, guys.